So if you've got problems, how do you deal with them? Every person that you meet is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. But what is the correct approach to facing your problems? There seems to be a dangerous trend amongst young people today to project their problems upon society, upon culture, upon the leadership, upon the establishment. Take a look at how Jordan Peterson responded to this young person with a fascinating and empowering response.
I want to know, what is your answer to young people for some of the really big problems facing humanity, like the climate catastrophe, like economic crisis, like the precarious job market? Because they just don't, like, you talk all this much about individual responsibility. Most of us are never going to be able to afford to have all of these assets to have responsibility over. So what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Well, it's actually rather difficult to answer a question that ends with your comments are banal, politely.
Classic.
So, I would consider that more of an opinionated personal and political statement than actually a question. So why don't you try reformulating that so that there's an actual question there?
What is your So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy, like the
They're not
economic
as far
crisis?
out of your control as you think.
What is your answer to
Do you think
people
that
who
you're
are
worse
facing
off
these
than
questions?
do you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think that
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
So, can I just if a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I think generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors. That's what it looks like.
What a guy, Jordan Peterson. Now, his perspective really aligns beautifully with the Jewish spiritual approach, the Torah approach, which is a principle called Hashgacha Pratis. Hashgacha Pratis means individual and customized divine providence. It means that you are not a mistake, and where you are is exactly where you need to be. It means that what you have is exactly what you need, and what you don't have, you simply don't need. The divine doctrine of individual divine providence, of Hashgacha Pratis, teaches us that you are never displaced. You are only dispatched. Because where you are, you're on assignment. It's not your problem, it's your assignment. We were created flawed so that we could fix this world. Before we were born, we actually chose which parents we wanted to be born into. Can you imagine? We chose those parents, we chose that dysfunctional family, that economical status. It was chosen by our soul before we were born because our soul understood what our mission is in this world. And before we went down that slide to come into a body in this world before birth, we were given a special backpack with all of the tools that we need to overcome the dysfunction in that particular lifestyle. This is the principle of tikkun olam, of fixing the world, of repairing a world that's imperfect. Because our job is to take a world that's broken and to fix it instead of kvetching and complaining all day long about what's broken all around us. If you think about it this way, in the story of Genesis, God creates the world in 7 days. That entire story is related to us in about 31 verses in the Bible. Yet, when it comes to the Jewish people constructing a home for God in the tabernacle, it's like the portable synagogue that they built when they came out of Egypt, that took half the book of Exodus, about 10 times the amount of verses, maybe 400 verses in the Bible. So the creation of heaven and earth takes just 31 verses. Creation of a little synagogue for God in the desert in the book of Exodus takes half the book of Exodus. Why the disparity? Shouldn't the Bible be spending much more emphasis on the far greater achievement of creation of heaven and earth than it is on a little tiny sanctuary that the Jewish people built for God Almighty? The answer is that it's no big deal for a perfect God to build a home for an imperfect human being. But what is a big deal is for an imperfect human being to build a home for a perfect God. Enough of complaining about our problems. Let's redefine them as our assignment, knowing full well that we are empowered to overcome. Let's stop kvetching, let's stop complaining, and take responsibility to make the rest of our lives the best of our lives.